Well, never fails. I start to talk about something and chainsaws start up or leaf blowers. Today I'd like to talk to you about confirmation bias and why that is not necessarily good for your mental health during a pandemic. The other day, my friend, well, sister, called up and she said, it's just really strange. I've been reading in Revelations about the end of times, and look, there's locusts, big swarm of locusts, earthquake in Salt Lake City, swarm of locusts that like the size of a country or state of Rhode Island or whatever in the Middle East or somewhere. She didn't specify where. And also, of course, pandemic. And so what's next? And anyway, and she also mentioned the seas turned to blood, and she mentioned the red tide. I thought, okay, what's next? And I started to realize that two things: our love of narratives and the apocalyptic narrative. So we just start feeding the pieces into that predictable narrative that ends with apocalypse, end of the world, and Antichrist and that. But then it's like, okay, how is that actually being determined? Why were those puzzle pieces fitting in at all? And that's because of the good old cherry picking of data, which is a kind of confirmation bias, a kind of cognitive bias that's triggered many times by emotions. But the confirmation bias lets you cherry pick, okay, the sea of blood, okay, if that's conceivably that, and red blood red, and red tide. Pandemic, definitely have that. Earthquake, well, we always have earthquakes, but we just happen to know about that one in Salt Lake City 2 weeks ago. Plagues of locusts, that's a big one. Not sure exactly where it is, but it's damaging and terrible. But are they all necessarily unusual, or just as the fact that you know about them and you're able to cherry pick them into that model and fit them into the apocalyptic model, does that is really the challenge. So it's very difficult to overcome confirmation bias. One way to do it is to essentially try to debunk what you're doing and look at multiple working hypotheses, and then also just recognize that those hopefully are unrelated events. But realize too that confirmation bias can be very dangerous for your mental health. So especially in times of emergencies, or when you need to keep a cool head and make good decisions and not panic buy, well, I would say toilet paper, but I think we're on to panic buying something else at this point. Anyway, so keep that in mind and stay safe.